Winter wind crossed the valley like a knife drawn slow. Tom Morgan stood at his cabin window, counting what remained between his family and March. 1 cord of wood, maybe enough if they burned careful. His children slept behind him in the loft, their breathing soft and steady in the firelit dark. 2 days now. 2 days since smoke rose from the widow's chimney across the hollow. Tom pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Sarah Brennan's cabin sat a quarter-mile distant, a dark shape against darker hills, no light in her window, no curl of smoke against the star-filled sky, the kind of silence that meant death was working patient and sure. He turned back to the fire, added 1 split log with the careful precision of a man measuring time in cordwood. His daughter Emma had asked at supper, her small voice cutting through the meal's quiet. "Papa, why doesn't Mrs. Brennan's house have smoke?" Tom had no answer then. He had none now. He'd lost his wife Mary 3 years past, childbirth taking her the way it took so many frontier women. He'd raised Jacob and Emma alone since, going through the motions of fatherhood with competence but no joy. Survival was enough, keeping them fed, warm, alive through the hard seasons. Anything more felt like betrayal of the woman he'd buried on the hill. But survival had a cost. It made you count things, wood and flour and days until spring. It made you watch a neighbor's chimney go cold and calculate whether her death was your business. Tom walked to the woodpile outside, frost crunching under his boots. He counted again in the moonlight, hoping his arithmetic was wrong. It wasn't. 23 pieces of split pine. 6 weeks of winter left. Maybe 7 if the cold held mean. 2 people and 2 children burning 4 pieces a day. The numbers didn't lie. They never did. Sarah Brennan had moved here with her husband Frank 2 years back. Good people, quiet, kept to themselves the way frontier families did. Frank died last fall when his horse fell crossing the swollen creek. Sarah had stayed on alone through autumn, pride or stubbornness keeping her upright. The settlement women brought food after the funeral, then drifted back to their own concerns. Now her chimney stood cold, and Tom Morgan knew what that meant. He went back inside, checked his children one more time. Jacob sprawled across his bed, one arm flung out. Emma curled tight, clutching the rag doll her mother made before dying. They looked so small, so fragile. They needed their father. They needed warmth through the killing weeks ahead. Tom sat by the fire until it burned low. He didn't add wood. He was done counting for tonight. "Forgive me, Mary," he whispered to the flames. He wasn't sure what he was asking forgiveness for. Not yet. But come dawn, he'd need it. Tom crossed the frozen hollow at first light, his breath clouding white. He told himself he was checking fence lines. His boots knew better, carrying him straight to Sarah's door. The door was frozen shut, ice sealing it tight. Tom knocked anyway. No answer. He knocked again. Harder. Nothing but wind and the creak of bare branches. He moved to the window, scraped frost from the glass with his glove. Sarah Brennan sat huddled by her stove, wrapped in every quilt she owned. Her breath made small clouds in the air inside her own home. She wasn't moving much. Just small adjustments, pulling the quilts tighter, conserving what little warmth her body still made. Tom's throat went tight. The stove was dead cold, had been for days. He wanted to break the door down, haul her to his cabin, force help on her the way you'd rope a calf for branding. But pride was a frontier necessity, the last thing people had when everything else was gone. Breaking her door meant breaking her dignity. Tom walked home slow, his mind working the problem like a puzzle with no good solution. 1 cord of wood, 2 cabins, 6 weeks of winter, split it between them. Both families freeze. Keep it whole. He watches a neighbor die. The settlement would understand. A man's first duty was to his children. No one would blame him for that choice, except Tom would blame himself. And his children would learn that survival mattered more than mercy. He spent the afternoon with Jacob and Emma, playing simple games, reading from their one book. Emma climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done in months. "Is Mrs. Brennan sick?" "Papa." "Yes, honey." Are you going to help her? Tom looked at his daughter's trusting face. I don't know yet. Mama would help her, Emma said simply. The words hit like a fist. Because Emma was right. Mary would have marched across that hollow with blankets and soup and hard common sense. Mary would have found a way. She always did. That night, after the children slept, Tom sat by the fire with his final choice laid bare. He could keep counting cordwood in days. He could survive winter and bury Sarah Brennan come spring thaw. Or he could stop counting. He looked at his woodpile through the window. 23 pieces of split pine. Each one a day his children stayed warm. Each one a choice between mercy and mathematics. Mary's voice echoed in memory. We take care of our own. Tom. Sarah Brennan wasn't kin. Wasn't even close friend. Just a neighbor woman who'd had the bad luck of losing her husband and the worse luck of running out of wood. In a winter that wouldn't quit. But somehow, alone in that cold cabin across the hollow, she'd become our own in ways Tom couldn't explain and didn't want to examine. He stood, pulled on his coat. The counting was done. Tom worked in the dark before dawn, his axe falling steady and sure. Each split log got stacked on the sled. His hands bled through his gloves, but he didn't stop. The woodpile that had meant survival disappeared piece by careful piece. When the last log was split, Tom stood in the empty space where his winter had been. His breath came hard, not from exertion but from the weight of what he'd done. The sled was loaded heavy. His woodpile was bare earth and wood chips. He hauled the sled across the frozen hollow, muscles burning, the runners squealing on the hard snow. Sarah's cabin was still dark. The woman inside was still dying slow. Tom stacked the wood beside her door. Working quiet. Perfect chords. Carefully arranged so they'd shed snow and stay dry. No note. No knock. This wasn't heroism seeking recognition. This was just one human keeping another human alive. When the sled was empty, Tom stood back and looked at what he'd done. A winter's worth of warmth, given away in the space of an hour. His children would wake to an empty woodpile and a father who'd gambled their lives on a stranger's need. Walking home, Tom felt strange lightness in his chest. He'd condemned his family to cold, maybe death. Yet he felt more alive than any moment since Mary's burial. The wall around his heart, built thick these 3 years, had cracked wide enough to let something in, or maybe let something out. He was halfway home when he heard her voice. Tom. Sarah Brennan stood in her doorway, wrapped in quilts, staring at the impossible gift stacked beside her door. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, but something fierce burned there now. Understanding. Recognition of what the wood cost. Tom stopped walking. They stood 30 yards apart in the gray dawn, two people who'd both lost spouses. Both learned to count days instead of living them. You had no wood left, Sarah said. Her voice broke on the words. Tom nodded. No point denying what she could see plain. Why? He didn't have an answer that made sense. Or maybe he had too many answers. All tangled together. Because Emma asked, because a cold chimney was a death sentence and he couldn't unknow that. Because he was tired of counting. You needed it more, he said finally. Sarah's face crumpled. She pressed one hand to her mouth, tears freezing on her cheeks. For a long moment she just stood there. This woman who'd held herself together through her husband's death and months of widow's solitude, finally breaking under the weight of someone else's kindness. What will your children do? She whispered. Tom looked back at his cabin, smoke rising thin from the chimney. We'll manage. It was a lie and they both knew it, but it was the only answer he had. Sarah stepped off her porch, quilts dragging in the snow. She walked toward him, slow and unsteady, until they stood close enough to see each other's breath in the frozen air. Thank you, she said. Tom nodded. Words seemed too small for what passed between them in that moment. Two people who understood loss and sacrifice without needing explanations. Two people who'd forgotten what it meant to be part of something larger than their own survival. The wind picked up, cutting through Tom's coat. He needed to get home, check on his children, figure out what came next. But he stood there another moment, held by something he couldn't name. Sarah saw it. Go take care of your family. Tom turned and walked home empty-handed. The sun was rising now, painting the snow orange and pink, beautiful and cold and indifferent. Behind him, smoke began rising from Sarah Brennan's chimney. 3 days later, the blizzard hit. Tom woke to whiteout conditions, wind screaming around the cabin corners like something alive and angry. He could barely see his own porch through the horizontal snow. This was the kind of storm that rewrote maps, buried livestock, turned familiar trails into death traps. Jacob and Emma huddled by the fire, eyes wide. Tom added the last of his scavenged wood fence rails he'd pulled down, branches he'd dragged from the tree line. Maybe enough for 2 days if they burned it slow. The knock came hard and urgent. Tom opened the door to Sarah Brennan standing in the howling white, a canvas bundle clutched to her chest. Snow caked her clothes. Her face was fierce despite the exhaustion. "You gave me life," she said, voice raised over the wind. "I won't let you freeze for it. We share what's left, or we're both fools." Tom's pride rose up automatic. "I can manage. With what wood I can see your piles empty from my window." Jacob appeared at Tom's elbow. "Papa, let her in. It's what Mama would do." The words cut clean through Tom's resistance. He stepped aside. Sarah entered, bringing cold and snow and something else with her. The possibility that survival didn't have to mean alone. She unwrapped her bundle wood she'd brought back, a portion of what he'd given, and her own meager supplies, food, blankets, the pieces of 2 households merged by necessity. "We pool everything," Sarah said. "Ration careful. Take turns tending the fire. 2 families, 1 cabin, until this storm breaks." Emma stared at Sarah with open wonder. "You're staying?" "If your papa allows it." Tom looked at his children's faces, saw the cold already creeping through the cabin, knew his pride was a luxury none of them could afford. "We'd be grateful for the company," he said quietly. The first day passed in awkward adjustment. Sarah cooked while Tom kept the fire going with careful precision. 4 pieces of wood a day. No more. Emma shadowed Sarah's every move, hungry for female presence. Jacob helped his father, learning to bank coals, to squeeze every minute of warmth from every log. The second day, conversation started. Small things at first. The storm's fury, memories of worse winters, carefully neutral topics that kept the silence from growing too heavy. By the 3rd day, they'd found a rhythm. Tom woke early, built up the fire. Sarah made breakfast. The children played quietly, their laughter a strange sweet sound Tom had almost forgotten. After supper, Sarah told stories while Tom mended harness. The children listened rapt, Emma leaning against Sarah's shoulder. Tom watched his daughter soak up the maternal warmth like desert ground taking rain. Something in his chest tightened and loosened at the same time. The 4th night, the fire burned dangerously low. Tom checked the wood supply. 3 pieces left. Maybe 1 more day if they were lucky. "I'll go out," he said. "Check my old pile. Might be scraps I missed." In this, Sarah gestured at the window where snow still fell thick. No choice. Tom bundled up and went out into the screaming white. The cold hit like a physical blow. He fought his way to where his woodpile had stood, dug through the snow with numb hands. Nothing. Just frozen ground and wood chips and the ghost of his winter survival. He turned back toward the cabin, and the world tilted. His legs went out from under him. Cold was inside him now, in his bones, slowing his blood. Tom made it to the door, fell through it onto the cabin floor. "Papa." Jacob's voice. Frightened. Then Sarah's hands on him, steady and sure. She stripped off his frozen coat, his boots, wrapped him in quilts, She held his shaking hands between hers, breathing warm air on them, rubbing circulation back. "I've got you," she said. "I've got you." Tom's children watched their father being cared for, something they'd never seen, something he'd never allowed. But Sarah's hands were warm, and her voice was steady, and Tom let himself be tended for the first time in 3 years. The storm raged on. Days blurred together in the amber warmth of the cabin, time marked only by meals and sleep and the slow consumption of their wood supply. Tom recovered from his frozen stumble. Sarah had saved his life, sure as he'd saved hers. The debt between them was balanced now. Or maybe so tangled neither could say who owed whom. Evenings became the heart of their shared existence. After the children slept in the loft, Tom and Sarah sat opposite sides of the fire. Not speaking at first. Just two people who understood that silence could be companionship. One night, Sarah broke it. "Tell me about Mary." Tom's instinct was to deflect, to keep his late wife locked away where grief couldn't touch her. But Sarah's eyes were kind, and the fire was warm, and the walls around his heart had been cracking for days. She was stubborn. Tom said, "Fierce about everything. Never backed down from anything. Including childbirth when every woman for 50 miles told her the baby was positioned wrong. She sounds remarkable." "She was terrified," Tom continued, the words coming easier now. "Told me the night before Emma came that she knew something was wrong, but she wouldn't listen to fear. Said our daughter deserved a mother who was brave." Sarah was quiet a moment. "She gave her life for that baby." "Yes. That's love," Sarah said softly. "The truest kind." Tom looked at Sarah across the fire. "Tell me about Frank." Sarah's turn to carry the weight of memory. "He was good, solid, the kind of man who kept his word and worked hard and provided well. But after we lost our daughter at birth, something in him closed off. He couldn't talk about her, couldn't grieve, just buried it all and worked himself harder." "I'm sorry. We had a good marriage," Sarah said, "but not a close one. Not after we lost her. I think he died still carrying that grief, never letting it out." The parallel hung between them. Two people who'd loved and lost. Two people who'd learned to survive instead of live. Two people who were just now remembering there might be difference between the two. Emma's voice drifted down from the loft. "Mama Sarah?" Sarah's breath caught. Tom saw the tears spring to her eyes. "I'm here, sweetheart." Sarah called up. "Will you tell another story tomorrow?" "Of course. I love you," Emma said sleepily. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth. Tom watched her struggle with the weight of those words. The responsibility and the gift all tangled together. "I love you too," Sarah whispered. Tom's throat went tight. His daughter was bonding to this woman, weaving her into their family's fabric. He should probably feel something about that. Protectiveness, maybe, or worry about Emma getting hurt when Sarah eventually left. Instead, he felt relief. His children needed more than he could give alone. They needed softness and stories and a mother's love. And Sarah clearly needed them too. These children filling the hole her lost daughter had left. "Jacob asked me today if you were going to be his new mother," Tom said quietly. Sarah looked at him, startled. "What did you tell him?" "I said I didn't know." "And what do you know, Tom?" Tom met her eyes across the fire. "I know my children are happier than they've been in 3 years. I know this cabin feels like a home again instead of just a place to survive winter. I know you tend my frost-damaged hands with more care than I've shown myself since Mary died. Tom, I know I'm not ready." He continued, "I know you're not ready. I know it's too soon and too complicated and the settlement would talk, but I also know when this storm breaks and you go back to your cabin. Something in me is going to break too." Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I feel it too." They sat in silence after that, but it was different now, charged with possibility, heavy with hope and fear in equal measure. The fire burned low. Tom added one more piece of wood. 3 pieces left now. Tomorrow they'd have to make hard choices about warmth and survival again. But tonight, in this moment, Tom felt warmer than he had in years. The storm broke on the 7th day. Tom and Sarah stood outside in the sudden stillness. The world transformed to white drifts and blue sky, beautiful and harsh and ready to test them again. "We should separate back to our cabins," Sarah said. "Before people talk." Tom knew she was right, but the knowing didn't make it easier. They divided the remaining wood. Sarah carried her portion home across the hollow. Tom watched her go. His cabin suddenly too quiet, too empty, despite his children's presence. But the separation didn't hold. Emma begged to visit Miss Sarah. Jacob needed help with reading, and Sarah was better at it than Tom. Sarah's chimney needed fixing, and Tom was handy with stone and mortar. They traded meals, labor, small kindnesses that kept them orbiting each other's lives. The children were the bridge. Emma spent hours at Sarah's cabin, learning to sew, to cook, soaking up the feminine presence she'd been starved for. Jacob helped Sarah with heavy chores, growing taller and more responsible under her gentle guidance. Spring arrived in fits and starts. Mud, melt, the first brave shoots of green. And with the thaw came the settlement's attention. Tom first noticed it at the general store. Women's voices dropped when he entered. They smiled tight and turned away. Mrs. Henderson made a point of asking about that widow woman with knowing emphasis. He brushed it off. Frontier gossip was inevitable as winter cold. But Sarah felt it worse. At church, pews emptied around her. Women who'd brought casseroles after Frank's funeral now crossed the street to avoid her. The settlement's matriarchs had rendered judgment, and Sarah Brennan had been found wanting. Tom saw the toll it took. Sarah's shoulders hunched a little more each Sunday. Her smile came less easily. She started suggesting maybe the children shouldn't visit so often. "People are talking," she said. "Let them talk. It's not that simple. Tom, your children." "My children are happier than they've been since their mother died," Tom said firmly. That matters more than gossip. But the poison was spreading. Jacob came home one afternoon, confusion written across his young face. "Papa, Mrs. Henderson said you and Miss Sarah are causing scandal." "What scandal?" Tom's hand stilled on the harness he was mending. "It's when people talk about things that aren't their business." "But why are they talking about you and Miss Sarah?" "Because we're friends. And some folks think friendship between a man and woman without marriage is improper." Jacob frowned. "That's stupid." "Mind your tongue," Tom said automatically. But his son wasn't wrong. That night, Tom lay awake, wrestling with the same equations that had plagued him all winter. Different mathematics now, not cordwood and days, but reputation and happiness. His children standing in the settlement versus their emotional well-being. Social approval versus the first real connection he'd felt since Mary died. He could step back. Let propriety rule. Stop the visits, the shared meals, the growing entanglement of their lives. The settlement would approve. His children would be protected from whispers. They'd also lose Sarah. And Tom would lose the woman who made him remember what it felt like to be alive instead of just surviving. The choice should have been harder, but Tom found it surprisingly easy. He'd already given up his wood for Sarah's life. What was his reputation measured against that? Tom found Sarah at her cabin in the long spring dusk. She was planting seeds in window boxes, her hands gentle in the dark soil, preparing for growth, for life continuing. She saw him coming and straightened, wiping dirt on her apron. She knew. Somehow she knew why he was here. Tom, Sarah. He stopped at the base of her porch steps. "I've been thinking." "So have I," she said quietly. "I'll keep my distance from you and the children. Give the talk time to die down." "No." Sarah blinked. "Tom, your children's reputations will survive some gossip." Tom interrupted. "You know what won't survive going back to how we were before? Me alone. Counting days. You alone. Waiting for next winter to finish what this one started. The children without the joy you've brought back into their lives. People are saying terrible things. People always say terrible things. Tom said, doesn't make them true. Doesn't make them important. He climbed the steps, stood close enough to see the tears gathering in her eyes. I gave you my wood that morning because it was the right thing to do. I let you into my cabin during the storm because it was the right thing to do. Now I'm choosing you because it's the right thing to do. Maybe the only right thing I've done in 3 years. Tom, I'm not asking you to do anything, Tom said gently. I'm telling you what I've decided. I'm going to court you, Sarah Brennan, properly and publicly. I'm going to stand beside you at church and dare anyone to say a word. I'm going to ask the pastor about wedding dates, assuming you're willing. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. It's too soon. Frank's barely been gone. 8 months, Tom said, and Mary's been gone 3 years. Grief doesn't run on schedules. Sarah, you taught me that. Neither does kindness. Neither does love. The word hung between them. Love. Tom hadn't meant to say it, but it was true. Somewhere between the wood and the storm and the firelit conversations, he'd fallen in love with this strong, wounded woman who understood loss and sacrifice. I'm not asking you to forget Frank. Tom continued. I'll never forget Mary, but we're still alive. Sarah, we deserve to live like it. Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face. What if I'm not ready? Then I'll wait. Tom took her hands, dirt and all. But I won't wait in silence and I won't wait alone. I'm here. I'm choosing you. And I'm asking, not demanding. But asking, do you choose me too? Sarah looked at him through tears. This man who'd given everything for her life, who'd shared his home and his children, who was willing to face down the entire settlement for the chance at future together. Yes, she whispered, if you'll have me. All of me. Grief and fear and the fact that I'm scared to hope again. I'll take all of you. Tom said, you took all of me when you wouldn't let my family freeze. Seems only fair. Sarah laughed. A wet sound that was half sob. Tom pulled her into his arms, held her while she cried against his chest. They stood like that as dusk deepened to dark. Two broken people beginning to believe they might heal each other. We'll face them together, Tom said into her hair. Sunday service. You and me and the children, sitting together like the family we're becoming. Sarah pulled back, wiped her eyes. They'll talk. Let them talk. Tom smiled. I've learned something this winter. What people say matters a whole lot less than what we do. And what I'm doing is choosing kindness over gossip, choosing family over propriety, choosing you. Sarah kissed him then, soft and tentative and sweet. The first kiss for both of them since their spouses died. It tasted like salt and hope and second chances. When they pulled apart, Sarah was smiling through tears. Her seeds, your soil. Tom looked at the window boxes she'd been planting. Our future. Sunday morning broke clear and bright. Tom dressed his children with extra care. Jacob's hair combed flat. Emma in her best dress, the one Mary had made. They walked to Sarah's cabin together. A family in formation. Sarah waited on her porch in her good dress, her hair pinned careful. She looked terrified and determined in equal measure. Ready? Tom asked. Sarah took Emma's hand on one side. Tom held Jacob's on the other. They walked to church 4 across, deliberate and visible. The settlement watched them come. Tom felt every eye, heard the whispers hiss like wind through grass. The church doors stood open. Inside. Families filled the pews, their Sunday best and their judgment worn equally proud. Tom led his little group down the center aisle. Pews didn't exactly empty as they passed, but people shifted, created distance. The message was clear. They took a pew in the middle. Tom, Emma, Sarah, Jacob, shoulder to shoulder. Tom felt Sarah trembling beside him. He reached over and took her hand. Open and obvious. Let them see. Let them know. This was his choice, and he wasn't hiding it. Pastor Williams preached on community and charity, on loving thy neighbor, on the Good Samaritan who stopped when others passed by. Tom wondered if the good pastor knew how pointed his sermon was, or if God just had a sense of irony. After the final hymn, Pastor Williams asked for announcements. The moment Tom had been waiting for. He stood. Sarah's hand tightened on his. The church fell silent. Every eye turned toward him. Tom's mouth went dry. He'd faced down blizzards and hunger and the death of his wife. But standing here, about to speak truth to his neighbor's judgment, was harder than any of it. Jacob reached up and squeezed his other hand. His son's quiet support steadied him. Most of you know what I did this winter, Tom began. His voice came out stronger than he felt. I gave my wood to Sarah when she needed it. Then she saved my family when the blizzard came. We survived together, 2 families under one roof, sharing what little we had. He paused, looked around at faces ranging from sympathetic to cold. Some folks think it's too soon, too convenient. Maybe they're right by their calendars. But grief doesn't run on schedules, and neither does kindness. Mrs. Henderson's face was pinched with disapproval. Mr. Cooper looked uncomfortable. But old Mrs. Chen, widow herself for 20 years, was nodding slowly. My children needed more than survival. Tom continued. They needed family, and Sarah needed the same. We found it in each other, through a winter that tested every soul in this settlement. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. I choose kindness over gossip. I choose family over propriety. I stand before God and this community and say that Sarah Brennan has brought light back into my house, laughter back to my children, and purpose back to my life. The silence stretched. Tom felt sweat on his back despite the cool morning. Then Mrs. Chen stood, her old bones creaking. The boy speaks truth. What's scandal in supporting neighbors? In building family from ashes. I've buried 1 husband and raised 4 children alone. I know what widow's grief looks like. I also know what healing looks like. She looked around at her neighbors. Some of you brought me food when John died. Some of you helped with my harvest. That wasn't scandal. That was community. This is the same. One by one. Others stood. Not everyone. Maybe half. But enough. Mr. Cooper rose. Tom's right. Winter was hard on everyone. We should celebrate folks who helped each other through it, not condemn them. Young Mrs. Parker stood, infant in her arms. Sarah helped me birth this baby. Came in the middle of the night. Stayed until morning. Never asked for anything in return. That's the woman I know. Pastor Williams smiled, warm and genuine. Then perhaps we should speak of wedding dates instead of scandal. Tom looked at Sarah. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. Yes, Tom said. Yes, we should. They married in late spring with wildflowers and simplicity. Emma and Jacob stood beside them, holding bouquets they'd picked that morning. Half the settlement came. The other half stayed away. Tom found he didn't mind. Pastor Williams kept it short and sweet. Do you, Thomas Morgan, take this woman? I do. Do you? Sarah Brennan, take this man? I do. Promises made and meant and sealed with a kiss while the children cheered. The wedding breakfast was modest but joyful. Mrs. Chen brought her famous berry cake. Mr. Cooper played fiddle. Emma danced with every adult who'd attend. Jacob tried to look dignified, but couldn't quite hide his smile. That afternoon, Tom and Sarah began the work of blending their households. They chose Tom's cabin for practical reasons, bigger, better situated. But they brought pieces of Sarah's life, too. Her quilts on his furniture, her dishes in his cupboard, both families' photographs lined up on the mantel. Mary and Frank looked out from their frames, forever young, forever missed, but not erased, not forgotten. Just honored as part of the story that led here. The garden became their shared project. Sarah brought seeds she'd saved from her marriage to Frank, heirloom tomatoes, herbs, flowers that had belonged to her mother. Tom had cleared and tilled the land, rich soil ready for planting. They worked together in the long spring evenings, Sarah showing Emma how to plant seeds just deep enough, Jacob learning from Tom how to build proper stakes for tomato vines. The children's laughter floating across the land like music. Her seeds, his soil, Tom said one evening, watching Sarah teach Emma to thin seedlings. Sarah looked up, dirt on her hands and joy on her face. Our future. The garden grew through summer. Tomatoes ripened heavy on the vine. Herbs filled the air with sweet scent. Flowers bloomed in shades Mary would have loved. Emma started calling Sarah Mama Sarah, a compromise that honored both women. Sarah wept the first time she heard it. Happy tears that came easier now. Jacob warmed slower but true. One evening, Tom found the boy sitting close to Sarah, listening to her read. Her hand rested gentle on his hair. Jacob didn't pull away. The settlement's divisions healed gradually. Some neighbors stayed distant. Mrs. Henderson remained coldly proper. But enough people accepted the new family that it stopped feeling like exile. Mrs. Chen became a regular visitor, her wisdom and stories welcomed. The Coopers invited them to dinner. Slowly, carefully, community knitted back together around them. Summer evenings found Tom at the same window where he'd once counted cordwood and watched death approaching. Now he watched life multiplying, his garden thriving, his children running between the rows. Sarah calling them to supper with love in her voice. The wind crossed the valley. No longer a knife, but a gentle hand. Smoke rose from his chimney, carrying the smell of Sarah's cooking. Emma's laughter drifted up. Jacob's serious questions about next year's planting. Tom pressed his hand against the glass, feeling the warmth from inside rather than the cold from without. He thought about that frozen morning when he'd split his last log and carried it to a dying woman's door. He'd given everything away that winter. His wood, his pride, his carefully maintained isolation. He'd risked his children's lives on a stranger's need, and somehow, impossibly, found himself wealthier than he'd ever been. Behind him. Sarah called his name. Supper was ready. The family was waiting. Tom turned from the window and walked into the warmth.